Congratulations, you made it halfway through the week and it's hump day. And if it's hump day, it's hemp day. Welcome to our fall webinar hemp series. I'm Robert Colangelo. I'm founding farmer of Hemplet Farms. We're a high-tech propagation company. We're located in Portage, Indiana, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's webinar. As a propagation company, we've seen a lot of urban myth and legend in the marketplace, especially when it comes to growing hemp. And our goal for hosting these events is to create a forum to exchange reliable, trustworthy, scientific information and share our experience with like-minded professionals in the Midwest hemp community. We all have a common goal, and that's to build a bigger pie so that we can all prosper in this new emerging market. We're not here to sell anything, just to promote reliable, fact-based information to help you succeed. It takes a lot of work to put on these webinars. Big thanks goes to Christian Lee and the Hemplet Farms team, Marguerite Bolt at Purdue University Extension Services, and the Midwest Hemp Council and iHemp Michigan for helping us promote the event. I'm very happy to say that we have two very content-rich presentations for you today. One's a market forecast, and the other is our version of Mythbusters, where we're going to talk about urban legend and facts when it comes to testing hemp. Well, I'm happy to announce our first speaker, who's going to share his perspective on how to increase the demand for CBD, along with other market facts. It's Ian Laird. He's an accomplished finance lawyer, investment banker, and private equity investor. He currently serves as the CFO and General Counsel for Hemp Benchmark. Hemp Benchmark, in my opinion, sets the bar for hemp price reporting. Ian's affable, he's smart, and he's passionate about bringing price transparency to the hemp market so it can operate with confidence and efficiency. Please give a warm round of applause for Ian Laird. Ian, take it. It's all yours.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you to the Midwest Hemp Council and all the attendees for taking the time to join us today. As Robert said, I'm the CFO and General Counsel of Hemp Benchmarks after 30 plus years in kind of a traditional finance background. During my 30 plus years as a lawyer and banker, I did a lot of developed and financed a lot of large scale industrial projects that required that you manage commodity risk. And that's really one of the prime drivers behind our founding New Leaf Data Services as the parent of Hemp Benchmarks. 2/3 of our management team comes from Standard & Poor's Global Platts. So they've had a long history of working together prior to us founding New Leaf Data Services. And the majority of the senior management team has been together since we launched New Leaf back in 2015. We can move on.
Okay, slide 4.
Hemp Benchmarks is a division of New Leaf Data Services. We're a leading provider of financial business and industry data for the North American hemp and cannabis markets. We also publish price assessments for cannabis in the legal U.S. and Canadian markets under our Cannabis Benchmarks brand. We're what's called an independent price reporting agency. Our team has 130 years of commodity data experience and 50 years of cannabis and hemp industry data experience. We formed the company to bring price transparency to wholesale markets to allow businesses to operate more and transact more efficiently. And long-term, we're looking to be the index or benchmark of record when we have future trading in hemp as we do for other agricultural commodities. How do we do it? We collect data securely and confidentially from our reporters in the field, boots on the ground, from our extensive price contributor network, which is made up of producers, processors, and purchasers. And we have partnerships with brokers, exchanges, vendors, and associations. We use the same methodology and analyses as the other major price reporting agencies for other commodities. And we never take a position in the market, so we're price agnostic. As we move on, where we've been, as they say, to know where you're going, you have to know where you've been. So we'll review very briefly, without hopefully too much angst, the pricing trends over the past year. We've been assessing prices from April 2019 to November 2020. So we have 20 months of price assessments, started publishing in the middle of the green rush, when there was a lot of irrational exuberance about the profitability of hemp as an agricultural product back in April of 2019. And since then, we've seen dramatic and painful price compression, with CBD biomass being down 89%, crude oil 95%, distillates 84%, and isolates 88%. CBD flower has been kind of a surprising aspect of the market, larger than we anticipated and more price resilient, although price is still down 43%. When we assess our prices, we have a data refinery. We throw our prices into the refinery. We throw out outliers. And then we look at the low prices and the high prices and come up with an assessed price, which is a simple weighted average. There is a large range of prices based on a number of factors. First, quality, obviously. Second, regions, their geographic distinctions. And third, the position of the buyers and sellers. When you have a very, very anxious seller, you're likely to get tougher spot prices. And when you have a unique or high quality product, maybe certified organic food grade, you're going to get a higher price. For example, if we look at CBD flower here, the low price, $50, probably didn't have a lot of bag appeal. And at $700, I guess that product was moving into the European markets. We can go into the next slide. You'll kind of see graphically this dramatic decline in prices. We seem to have reached a floor, if you will, at very low levels, albeit. We know the prices deteriorated rapidly over the past 20 months as it became clear that the market was oversupplied. Producers had difficulty securing offtake agreements, and processors were already building large inventories of extracted products. I mean, we talked to one large processor a week or two ago who said he still had 10 million, he had millions of pounds of biomass left over from 2019. Still substantial uncertainty about supply and demand in 2020, but we'll see how we look at that going forward through this growing season. On the next chart, you can kind of see this decline in prices. I think what's significant here, as you look over to the left, is that there has been a slight tick up in biomass to 61 cents per point of CBD for the smaller transactions. And we think based on market feedback from market participants, that's a reflection of the new 2020 higher grade, fresher biomass coming into the market. Okay. So where are we going? Obviously, the journey's been rocky so far. What do we have in store for 2020, 2021? First, we'll look at 2019. On the next slide. And we're looking at supply. Obviously, prices, as we all know, is driven by supply and demand. So here at Hemp Benchmarks, we've been tracking the amount of biomass that we think is going to be harvested and processable over the past couple of years. In 2019, registered acres exploded up to over 570,000 permitted acres. Probably 260,000 of that we anticipate was actually planted based on reports from the various State Department of Agriculture and market participants, but still multifold increase from 2018 and 2017. Based on our analysis, we think roughly, and very roughly, 100,000 acres of the planted acres was actually harvested and processable. Large losses in the field, as many producers experience from bad genetics, so low germination rates or a lot of male plants. Weather, we had some brutal weather during the harvest season in some of the major markets. Pests, kind of a new issue for hemp farmers without any pesticides to combat the pests. Bottlenecks in labor, dry, and storage, and also capital. Significantly. So large volumes of the 2019 biomass remain unprocessed, but has probably been degraded by time, and a lot of it will be either written off or diverted to other markets. As we spin forward to 2020, permitted acreage has declined by more than 30% from 2019 to 400,000 acres. More states with plans, Texas, Florida, et cetera, but major reductions in the established hemp states. Colorado down 50%, Kentucky down, down 80%, Montana down 75%, Tennessee down 70%, with increased acreage for fiber and grain, which we anticipate now is closer to 75 to 80% of the market versus the 90% in 2019. When we look forward to how much that's actually going to result in harvested processable acres, back on the prior slide, the USDA had reports to the Farm Service Administration of 146,000 acres last year, which was an undercount because most farmers don't report to the FSA, but they have roughly 40% less reported this year. Based on information from the DOAs, the state DOAs, and market participants, we think the actual planted acreage was down into the and 68 and 96, 96,000 to 112,000 acres, with probably a 15% harvested and processable rate. So we think supply will be down at least 50% this year from last year. We think the overhang will be written off, but there's still probably a relative level of oversupply, even at that level of acreage. We look at hemp economics briefly. Last year's hemp crop presented numerous challenges for many farmers in the field and in the marketplace. Based on the chart to the right, you'll see that farmers had much higher price expectations of $3, $4, minimum of $1.50 to $2 a point per CBD, and really that fell dramatically. As a result, farmers recalibrated their economics and rationalized their 220 grow plans by cutting back on the growing, just to get a big picture of profitability in the market. At $1 a point of CBD, with 1 acre yielding 1,000 pounds at 10% of CBG, would generate about $10,000 per acre. Many farmers told us their direct costs, excluding overhead, SG&A, are basically $10,000 to $15,000 an acre. So most farmers were out of the money last year. We do think that the cost of production has come down this year, with some farmers getting down to the $7,500 an acre. Some of that's from decline in seed costs, more efficient practices, and just general experience with the crop. So we did a production survey this month for our monthly report, and we had some interesting results there. Now, this obviously isn't representative of the entire market. We had a few hundred respondents, but there are probably more than 1,000 in the field, at least probably numbers of thousands in the field actually in production. But based on our survey, we see in the next slide that most of the farmers that responded to our survey were relatively small, with 0 to 10 acres. Over 50% of respondents small farmers. That's of the registered acreage that the survey respondents had permitted. They planted roughly 55%, with a very high level of 81% harvested, which was probably based on the small size of most of the respondents. As we tick forward, we'll see that 10%, less than 10% of the crop failed the THC 0.3% requirement. That's probably lower than the average. Most states reported somewhere between 10 and 20% hot crops. I think Indiana in particular did a good job of tracking genetics that are more likely to produce hot crops. And a lot of it is how quickly you can get the crop out of the field after you have your testing before it goes hot. You see almost half the respondents had issues with pests, mold, and disease. What we didn't calculate in here, which a couple of our New England farmers pointed out, was frost damage or snow damage from an early frost in New England and early snows in Colorado. Taking forward one more, we'll see that most of the farmers, and again, our survey respondents were generally on the small side, were low tech. Hand harvesting, which is extremely labor intensive, and hang drying, which is not optimal unless you have some kind of refrigerated storage, you're in a cold climate, or you have some ability to keep the plants from getting mold and mildew, which is a problem. So that's where last slide on the survey, 74% of the respondents were not vertically integrated and had to find processors for their biomass. And a larger percentage than we might think, 46%, were growing hemp for smokable flower this year as it became more widely known with the producers, the value of the flower and how to actually cut the colas and dry them and trim them for sale. Okay, the critical question is demand. How quickly is the CBD market going to grow and meet the supply coming out of the markets? The prognosticators, Nielsen had 2020 demand at 2.5 billion. BDSA had demand at 4.7 billion. We're on the lower end of that range at Hemp Benchmarks. Two major factors, obviously the FDA's inability to promulgate rules and regulations, which is keeping the major consumer packaged good companies out of the market. We knew that the Pepsis, the Coca-Colas, and some of the other big CPG companies had done a lot of diligence on suppliers of CBD to start incorporating into their food, beverages, and supplements. That's not going to happen until the FDA gives them the green light and the clear rules of the road. And that's put a damper because we don't have their vast marketing distribution networks and their shelf space and their advertising dollars. The second was COVID. With a lack of brick and mortar stores, you had a real problem with both access, with education and adoption. Hopefully, with the FDA acting in 2021 and us beginning to put COVID behind us, hopefully, we think the market can start growing as anticipated when we all started diving into CBD, CBG. A longer term, we believe that traditional industrial hemp, what we call fiber and grain, will be the bigger drivers in the market. The grain markets have been large in Canada, 120,000 acres in 2017, 78,000 in 2018, with hemp seed oil and hemp meal becoming increasingly popular as a food supplement. Longer term, fiber has the ability to displace multi-trillion-dollar markets in building products, textiles, non-woven fibers, etc. So we think the future is bright, but we all need to work to help develop the market to its full potential. So that's it for us. Please check us out, hempbenchmarks.com. We have free weekly hemp market insiders, which is a blog on topics of interest. And we have a subscription base for our monthly Hemp Benchmarks report, which has our price assessments and about 25 pages of analytics and information on what may be driving future price change. So, Robert, thank you. Thank everybody listening in. Sorry about the hiccups. I'm still getting used to Zoom even after all these months over my garage.
Well, Ian, thank you very much. That was a very concise and pithy market update. I've got a few questions for you. You talked about smokable flower being a bright spot, but on the chart it showed that there was a decline. Can you elaborate a little bit more on smokable flower?
Sure. I think smokable flower has been a surprise. It was really just in 2019, last year, that people started clipping and hanging their colas, trimming them and selling them as a consumer product. Initially, prices were quite high, but obviously supply has picked up. The European market is a very large market for flower, for both cigarettes and for CBD smokables. There is some movements in Indiana, Texas, and even in New York with new regs to ban smokable flower. I think that's a huge mistake. Hopefully that will be overturned. I think that's primarily driven by law enforcement with a difficulty differentiating between legal hemp CBD flower and illegal THC flower in certain markets.
CBG has been very hot. Can you talk a little bit about the CBG market and CBG prices?
We saw a large increase in the amount of acreage allocated to CBG this year. Some major seed producers were cutting back on the CBD seeds with the concern that the newer CBD genetics would create more hot crops. Based on the USDA proposal to test total THC, which is both THC and THCA, which would render a number of the newer high CBD hybrids more likely to go hot. CBG has a much higher ratio of CBDG to THC. Highly unlikely that CBG is going to go hot. Seed producers were pushing CBG seeds. The price was coming down, and producers were gravitating towards it. I think the issue there is the consumer is still trying to figure out what CBD can do for them, and CBG is just another universe. So it's going to take more education for consumers.
With so many farmers planting CBG this year, do you see a surplus of supply that's going to bring the price of CBG down?
Yeah, we think the price of CBG will fall in line with the price of CBD. The cost of production isn't that much different. I think CBG smokable flower will turn out to be a very attractive market. It has some interesting benefits. But no, we think that the prices will coalesce. The new one, CBN, which is great for sleep, made from oxidizing or decarbolizing THC, will maintain a relatively higher price, CBC as well. So the newer minor cannabinoids, which are being produced in much smaller quantities, will probably retain some significant premiums.
Final question on slide 6, you showed industrial seeds are up 101%. Just define what industrial seeds are and then talk a little bit about CBD seeds. Are they oversupplied, and where's the price on CBD seeds going?
Well, CBD seeds are definitely coming down. When folks saw that one of the major CBD seed producers generated $50 million in revenue from seed sales in 2019. You have a lot more entrants and a lot more sophisticated entrants. Obviously, people are doing a lot of work in genetics. New strains are being developed all the time. But clearly an increased supply of seeds across the board, which is driving prices down. And with margins coming down, it's only natural that seed input prices will come down as well.
One last question is, there's talk about hemp being traded on the commodity exchange. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, when we started, our team got in understanding that for a number of years, we'd be servicing the physical market, buyers and sellers. But longer term, we wanted to be the benchmark of record for when we thought cannabis, which is going to be a longer road, and hemp sell on major exchanges like the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, like other agricultural commodities, and provide hemp farmers with the same tools that other farmers have, the same financial tools of both managing their price risk and selling forward and getting some financial support, some additional working capital. The Global exchanges are extremely interested in hemp and ultimately cannabis as the largest new emerging agricultural commodities. They see the potential of both hemp, initially hemp, and then cannabis as an international agricultural commodity. And it's just a matter of time, we believe, before there is futures trading for hemp. The industry has to grow. We need about $5 billion in notional value. We need 3 years of price data. We're almost 2 years into that. So it's coming. It's going to take a little bit longer, but we think when it does, it's going to be a very interesting opportunity for both farmers and then for the end markets where, Coca-Cola, Nestle are all going to want to manage price risk by hedging their costs.
One last question came in is that you anticipate grain and fiber becoming the bigger drivers for U.S. hemp, but a number of farmers are sitting on production, as you mentioned, and they're likely going to sit out 2021 because of overcapacity. Can you talk a little bit more about that grain and fiber market?
Yeah, the grain market's a little bit different because people have been growing hemp seed oil for a number of years, particularly in Canada. So there is some processing infrastructure, but we lost it all for fiber. The major industrial companies are not interested in hemp as a replacement for whatever it is they're making out of their wood fibers or petrochemicals. And we've lost all the infrastructure. So farmers can grow the fiber. It's easier to grow, easier to harvest, more like a traditional row crop. The seed, the genetics are fairly well established from European fiber genetics. But we have no place, very few places to process it. Sunstrand was the one notable company that was trying to get into that processing fiber business. They unfortunately went bankrupt. There have been a couple of others. But there's more money coming into the sector. There was probably $750 million invested in CBD processing infrastructure between 2018 and 2019, and essentially nothing in fiber. We do see some of the major industrial equipment engineering firms, primarily in Europe, unfortunately, at this point, looking to develop the capability of processing hemp into medium density fiberboard and nonwoven fibers and some other applications. But it's going to take development. It's going to take investment.
Ian, thank you very much for those comments and that presentation. It's very important that we have organizations like yours that are providing good, reliable data so that we can make informed decisions. So keep up the good work, and hopefully we'll have you back again next year.
And I'll be working on my Zoom skills in the interim. Thanks, everyone.
Maybe you'll get those for Christmas. Well, when it comes to analytical testing of hemp, there's a lot of confusion out there. Total THC versus Delta 9, Delta 8, THC thresholds, reading COAs. Working with a trusted lab can help you maximize your yield, and inform you if your crop's about to go hot. So our next speaker is going to talk a little bit about that. But before we get into it, using your chat function again, I'd like to know what's been your biggest challenge working with an analytical test lab? Has it been quick turnaround time? Is it finding a trustworthy, reliable lab? Is it the cost of analytical testing? Or is it getting clear, understandable reports? Or if you have some other issue, let me know in the chat function. And as you're giving me those chats, we'll get the next speaker lined up. Ryan, do you want to get your presentation ready?
Yeah, thanks, Robert.
Our next speaker will be our version of Mythbusters, and he's going to talk about urban legends versus facts when it comes to analytical testing of hemp. Ryan Bellone is the commercial director for KCA Laboratories. They're an independent hemp testing lab in Nicholsville, Kentucky. Ryan spoke earlier this year at one of our webinars, and he gave us tips for picking an analytical lab. This time, he's going to dispel a number of myths out there. So please give a warm welcome for Ryan Bellone.
Thanks, Robert. And thanks for having me back. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
And you can hear me fine too?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about some of the myths that are in the analytical testing world. To start, let me get this going.
So here's one comment, just so you know. They said that navigating regulations that vary state by state has been a challenge when working with analytical labs.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'm happy to answer questions about that at the end too.
Okay.
So a little bit about KCA Labs. We're a full service analytical testing lab here in Nicholasville, Kentucky. We're just south of Lexington, just the next town south. The team here, we all came from the nutraceutical dietary supplement space, as well as testing anti-doping and racehorses. So we have combined almost 80 years experience testing for drugs and contaminants and botanicals and matrix types found in the hemp industry. We currently test 18 different cannabinoids in our potency test, but we have capabilities to test for 14 more. And we're the regulatory testing laboratory for the states of Massachusetts and North Dakota. And so in this presentation, we'll talk a little bit about sampling, THC regulatory thresholds, field tests and THC false positives, changing limits, and a little bit more on some THC isomers, particularly Delta 8. So in our world, for the sampling of material, especially by the regulators, we end up seeing most every state taking samples from the cola of the plant. Some states take 8 inches off the top. Some states take several inches from the tops of multiple plants. But what we find is that the cannabinoids are located in the trichomes of the plant for the most part, and the trichomes being found in the flower. And so when these regulators end up sampling material, they end up testing significantly higher levels of cannabinoids, particularly Delta 9 and THC and Delta 9 THCA, making up total THC. So one of the biggest issues I see in this industry is that the flower is looked at as a definition or regulatory definition of hemp, when in fact, as we probably all know here, the entire plant is cannabis sativa, is hemp. And I would like to just tell everybody that if you ever have a chance to try to promote the sampling of hemp plant material with regulators or with other people in the industry, to try to get regulation to adapt a more inclusive approach, sampling the entire plant, including leaves and stems, which sometimes we see when we test leaves and stems compared to flower, 10% or even less of the amount of THC in those parts of the plant, which can bring down what a lot of people consider hot hemp. On the THC regulatory thresholds, we all know about the 0.3% total THC. That comes from the 70s, where Small wrote a paper about the taxonomy of cannabis and indicated that this 0.3% total THC by dry weight basis it should be considered, anything less than that should be considered hemp. But what we find is, like for several years, especially like in Tennessee in 2019, some states were considering only Delta 9 THC and not including the acid version to make up total THC, which was giving some jurisdictions a leg up in terms of the production, allowing their plants to sit in the ground longer and allowing them to have higher yields for the cannabinoids. While other states, like here in Kentucky, we allow up to 0.399 and so on total THC. And what this comes from is the thought that the 0.3% is only one significant figure. So when you think of like 0.30 and 0.39, instead of rounding up that 9 to 0.4, you would just drop that figure and it would still be 0.3. So several states do consider up to and not including 0.4% as still being hemp. There is a push by the Vote Hemp organization that is trying to get the 0.3% up to 1%. And I urge everyone here to support that. I think that would help the industry basically more than anything out there right now, especially the farmers. A key takeaway from this is when people have, like, for example, a 0.32% finding in a 0.3 state, and they think that material is hot right away. And even some of the regulators I've seen consider it hot. It is important to always keep in mind that even a 0.32 or a 0.33 as the example here, when incorporating a laboratory's measurement uncertainty, which you can think of like a standard deviation or like an error in the testing, like it's a plus or minus percentage of that value, can turn a hot sample into a negative sample. So always, if you're a farmer and you're working with regulators and they say you have hot material, always consider the measurement uncertainty for the laboratory. And also, I would raise to all regulators the fact that this 0.3 only has one significant figure in the literature and even in the legislation. So please urge your regulators to try to look into this a bit more. I have seen some hot samples actually be tested as negative as hemp because of these changes or because of these items brought to their attention, especially measurement uncertainty. There's also the issue of THC false positives. This happens with testing the material itself, as also with drug testing especially with urine, where there's the common police reagent test where you can drop a piece of flour into one of these bags and it gets mixed into a reagent, changes colors, and shows that it's cannabis. A lot of times these tests do not differentiate between the various cannabinoids. It's basically just a cannabinoid test rather than a THC test. So keep that in mind, as well as on the drug testing on the urine side. There can be false positives due to the other cannabinoids, for example. So there's some literature out there about CBN leading to a positive drug test instead of THC. So it is true that there are tests out there that do not accurately test for the cannabinoid of interest being delta-9 THC. So the solution to this would be to always employ an analytical testing laboratory that's using chromatography and testing against certified reference standards so that the tests are being compared to a known standard. Also in this industry, we're seeing a lot of lab shopping for non-detect results. It's one of those things that a lot of people are looking for the THC-free material, especially on the isolate that can be used to make finished product that is also THC-free. But the problem here is the lack of definition and standardization for the term THC-free. So you can say that THC below 0.3% could be THC-free if the lab can't detect it. So here on the right is an example of a certificate of analysis from a quite well-known laboratory with an LOQ, which is limit of quantitation of delta-9 THC that's above the 0.3% limit. Usually LOD is a third of that. So if their LOD limit of detection is around 0.12, 0.13, that's still significantly high. Drug testing levels vary A lot of times 50 nanograms per milliliter in urine and blood is quite standard. That's typically seen in with police and the military. Pilots are tested down to 15 nanograms per milliliter. There's elite athletes that participate in the Olympics. It used to be 50 nanograms per milliliter in urine and blood, but once the CBD was taken off the prohibited list a couple years ago, they raised that threshold to 150 nanograms per milliliter in urine and blood. And even further, there are plenty of professions, police departments, and so on that have a zero tolerance level for THC. So it is very important to consider the limit of detection for these laboratories that are declaring these non-detects for these Delta-9 THC. Any lab can see nothing, so it's really important to consider. Unfortunately, at the moment, we don't have any literature or reliable literature that says at what level is safe to consume THC or CBD that contains very, very low levels of THC to be able to pass a drug test at these thresholds. It would be quite an expensive study to do so, and there's also biological differences between person to person, activity levels, fat levels, all kinds of things to consider. So it's very hard to pinpoint what is safe for people that are getting drug tested. The current craze in the market, I'm sure a lot of you are aware, is the Delta-8 THC. Basically, all of the Delta-8 that I see in the market being marketed claims to be compliant, especially because that's what it needs to be sold in head shops and gas stations and even online. But the truth of the matter is that this D8 THC distillate contains Delta-9 THC at varying levels. The issue is, and I'll get into this here in a second, but there are ways to dilute the D8 distillate so that the D9 levels are compliant. So you see a lot of people making gummies nowadays with the Delta-8. That way they can control the amount that's in there and dilute it down to be compliant per gummy. So basically, Delta-9, Delta-8 THC, they're THC isomers. Right? So they're almost identical. They have the same chemical structure, almost the same molecular weight. So that being said, they're very difficult to separate. They're very difficult to separate analytically by testing laboratories. And you can think of analytical testing as a very small scale of a process of an extraction facility for extracting hemp. So a lot of the same techniques are used just at different scales. So here you see on the right a chromatogram, which is a standard laboratory instrumentation output from HPLC showing Delta-9 and Delta-8 eluting off the column, very closely together. There's coelution, which is the merging of those peaks down at the bottom there, but it's very minor. In fact, the FDA has guidance for testing drugs with baseline resolution desired to be, which is that R value, desired to be at 2 or greater, which you can see at the bottom right, 2 peaks there. Baseline resolution means that between the 2 peaks, that line touches that baseline, the line that's horizontal there, and the resolution is how long it stays at baseline between peaks. So I'll go back to the last slide to compare that R equals 1. That's about what we have here. So that's not good enough for FDA drug testing standards, but it is good enough in a lot of different industries. And this is our data here. This is our calibration mix. We test 18 cannabinoids, like I said earlier, and we because we have so many of these cannabinoids in one run, a lot of them get merged together. So I'll jump into what we see from other laboratories here. The large peak here is delta 8 THC, and what you're looking for in analytical testing is basically perfect symmetry in the shapes of these peaks. Time and time again, we see something called fronting or masking, or even a shoulder, where the front of this peak, the left side of that peak where that arrow is actually another compound, is actually another analyte that is being counted towards the delta 8 value. And time again, when we test this, we see the delta 9 in that peak. We've parallel tested with other labs. Here's another one, which is the shoulder. You'll see that there's not perfect symmetry compared to the right side of that peak, that there's another analyte in there. And again, this is being counted as delta 8. There's CBC on the right. Usually we see CBN as well as some other THC isomers. But time and time again, we see these peaks have these shoulders, and in analytical testing, as well as cannabinoid extraction and processing, the name of the game is separation. You want to achieve separation. You want to be able to isolate them and quantitate them accurately. But several labs just basically what you should do as a laboratory at this point is go back and retest it and get separation between these peaks, rather than continue on with this coelution or this masking or the shouldering or the fronting. So any of this testing would go back for analysis in our lab, but many labs just continue on and report it as delta 8. So what we do is we test cannabinoids on 3 different platforms. I don't know if any other lab that does this. A lot of labs only use HPLC or GC-FID. Then some other labs will do confirmatory testing on GCMS, which includes mass spec. And then very few do LC mass spec, but we do all 3. Again, you'll see here on the left, these are standard mixes. There's some coelution between the D8 and the D9, as we mentioned earlier. But then when we test delta 8, we put it on these other platforms and purposely achieve baseline resolution greater than 2. As I was mentioning earlier, is the FDA requirement for testing drugs. The top being a resolution of 5, the bottom being a resolution of 2. And so we're getting separation of these analytes. So when we actually test a sample of this delta 8, again, on the left, there's a little bit of coelution on the HPLC. Most labs are getting at least that. Others, that high concentration of delta 8 is masking the delta 9. Some labs are able to get these 2 peaks and still quantitate the delta 9. But then when we put it on the GC on the top there on the right, and then the LC on the bottom there on the right, we see even further that there's definitely delta 8, definitely delta 9, and then several THC isomers that are just not identified. So these labs that are saying that there's 97, 98, 99% delta 8 in their material, I just have a hard time believing it. And time again, we've tested hundreds of samples, and we consistently see levels of delta 9 THC in these samples between 5 and even up to 20%, when several other labs are saying there's non-detect delta 9. So, there's been a lot of debate about this in the industry. A lot of people will say that we don't test correctly, but with our experience and capabilities in the lab and achieving separation and comparing the standards, I think it's safe to say that all or very close to all Delta 8 in the market contains Delta 9 THC, and very much of it at levels way above 0.3%, being sold online, gas stations, et cetera. So a lot of you have taken note that the DEA's paid close attention to this compound, Delta 8 THC, and for good reason. I'm surprised that the marijuana side of the industry isn't attacking this more, considering they're trying to legally, or at least on the state level, legally sell Delta 9 THC, behind lock and key and in dispensaries and under very, very tight regulations. So that being said, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Ryan. I've got a couple of questions here for you. The first one is, do you differentiate between broad spectrum and THC free? And if so, define what broad spectrum is and THC free and how you differentiate between them.
Yeah. So the broad spectrum and the THC free, those are marketing terms. We don't, on our side of the industry, what we do is we report values. THC free, in my opinion, doesn't exist. Time and time again, we see Delta 9. We at very, very, very low levels, even in isolate. There's some of our clients do test their isolate down to non-detect, but even then, we don't test low enough to detect it, in my opinion. I think it's always going to be there unless it's synthesized. But yeah, the way we kind of characterize material is by the cannabinoid content and the content of the terpenes, or the content of potential contaminants. And yeah, I think getting away from the marketing terms, or at least defining the marketing terms better, would help the industry.
Another question is, what chemical inputs, herbicides and insecticides, have you found when testing a sample?
We do see pesticides every now and then, usually not in very high amounts. And when I say that, it's like low parts per million, single digits, double digit parts per million. I can show you all something while I can show my screen. That way.
So, yeah, while you're looking for that, are there different standards of acceptability for grain, fiber, and CBD when it comes to pesticides?
I don't think so. The differences come when it comes to states. So this is a table we've built internally here that shows all the different limits for the pesticides as well as the states. And you can see they're kind of all over the place. New Hampshire tends to have basically no tolerance for anything. And then you can go on to Canada, and in my opinion, Canada has the most robust regulations. They can differentiate between the oil, dried cannabis, and fresh plants, which is basically as far as I've seen it go. So if anybody's trying to manufacture their material for sale across state lines, I know that we're not a lot of people are able to sell into Canada or export into Canada, but I would look at the Canadian regulations as a standard to kind of follow. They're much ahead of the federal government here, obviously, but also they're way ahead of most states. And I have trouble identifying a state that's doing it better than the whole country of Canada.
All right, last question. Do you think DEA will catch up and close the loophole with people that are selling Delta 8? I
have a hard time understanding why they haven't done so already. The testing that the federal government does, I've paid attention to their methods. I've paid attention to some of the NIST presentations and what the DEA tests for and how they test. And I would assume that without seeing their methods directly applied to the testing of Delta 8 distillate, I would assume that they're able to see the Delta 9. But at this point, I mean, it's in every shady gas station, every dispensary, every head shop. I mean, it's being sold online. You can buy it, underage and everything. It's pretty crazy how easy it is to get, considering what it is. But if they do close the loophole, I think what would happen, it'd be a very sudden, I guess they would suddenly go after some of the big players, especially the ones selling online. The results I was just showing you here, this sample in particular is one that's very easy to get online. They do the marketing on, very well-known podcasts and have advertising, in a bunch of different channels. So I think if it becomes more mainstream than it already has, and you start to see kids using it and, parents making a fuss about it, then I think that loophole is going to get closed a lot sooner than if we just continue on with the status quo.
Well, Ryan, thank you very much. And Ian, thank you both for those content-rich, informative presentations. This concludes our fall webinar series. Recordings of today's webinar will be available on the Hemplet Farms webpage, probably by the end of the week or early next week. Our next webinar will be on Wednesday, January 6th. I can't believe it, 2021. First time I said that, at noon Central Time. We're going to have two speakers. It's either going to be Sam Proctor, founder of GT Research, who will talk about hemp genetics. Their company is mapping the hemp genome and is doing some cutting edge research. Or we're going to have Marguerite Bolt from the Purdue Extension Services, sharing tales from the field. Or Ron Fazio, CEO of Hemp Synergistics, who makes a THC field test kit for law enforcement. And they are looking at applying this kit to the hemp farmers as a low-cost way to test crop and get immediate results. And we've spent a lot of time on these webinars with testing, because one of the saddest things is to see a farmer's hemp crop go hot. And one way to avoid that is buying good genetics and knowing who you're getting your seedlings and clones from, but also testing often so that you could control that. So on behalf of Hemplet Farms and the team, we want to wish you all a happy holidays. It's that time of year to help those that are less fortunate. And there's a lot of people out there that are in pain and are hurting. So do some good out there. I'm Robert Colangelo. Thanks for helping us make Hump Day, and have a great week.